We'll go ahead and get started. A couple things for our prayer list. We want to remember Kathy and Danny Price. Danny's got to meet with a surgeon tomorrow to see if he's going to have some pretty major surgery this week for some issues he's got going on. So if he does, it'll be 10 days of recuperation in the hospital before he gets to come home and all that. So, but just pray that he makes whatever decision is right for him, and that everything will turn out in the best way that it can. We've had a young man by the name of Dylan Price. I don't think they're related, but he is a great grandson of somebody who's a long-time member of the church, and Alberta Butler and her daughter's grandson. And he's about 16. He's got some blood issues and things happening. And then Claire Jack, who's actually had knee surgery a couple of weeks ago, and that went pretty well, better than they expected, but she's had trouble with some blood transfusions and things along that line. Amber Scheid, that I talked about this morning, she's due to have her baby in 3 or 4 weeks. Right now, the baby's only 2 pounds, and they're already preparing for the NICU unit. And then what's Bettis's first name? Georgina. I had Georgia down on my other stuff. Georgina Bettis.
She was Louise Michaels' daughter.
Whose?
Louise Michaels.
It's Louise Michaels' daughter, too. It's Mary Jane's daughter-in-law. And she's having some cancer issues. So remember all them and any others that we may have. So one thing I wanted to say, too, for some of you that are a part of the church and kind of sit here and watch and catch, if you next Sunday, of course, is Communion Sunday. If you cannot be at the church for communion, but you're going to be watching, you want to join in, drop us an email, send me a text, give me a call, something, and we will get you some communion supplies to go along with that. We got a little cup and bread, and a lot better than the first ones we had, that we will get to you so that you can participate in communion along with us. So let's pray. Father, we thank you for this beautiful afternoon, this opportunity to be in your house. Lord, the right to be able to carry a Bible without fear or worry. Lord, we thank you for your presence among us as we try to study your word. Help us to understand what is written there, the messages that you have given to us through it, that we might understand you better, serve you more. Lord, bless our church and all that we are doing, all the people that come, all the people that are blessed by coming, and the ones that are blessed by those that do come. And all these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Now we're in 45:6, Genesis 45:6, and about 5.5. But I want to just kind of set the tone for this chapter. To almost start reading it at the beginning of 45, so that everybody kind of understand what's going on. Joseph's been had a plan with his brothers to test them, to see if their morality and all that has gotten any better in the years that he's been gone. They still don't know that it's Joseph. Of course, Joseph knows that it's them, and he did the whole thing with making them bring Benjamin and all that. And so they've had lunch with them, some different things, and sent them on. Set it up to where it looked like that Benjamin had stolen his cup, hasn't brought back, and now he's listened to Judah explain everything, and that he cannot go back home to meet his father without Benjamin, that it would cause his father to die of grief, and that he agreed to stay for him. And Judah was the one that kind of led the charge to get rid of Joseph in the beginning. So we see there's a total turnaround with him. And so with that, starting with chapter 45, Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everybody leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified, excuse me, at his presence. Terrified's kind of a light word. They were afraid that they were all in trouble. But then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve you for a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen, and be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute.'" So, like I said, they were terrified when they found out this was Joseph, and thinking that, we're all doomed. And Joseph has not only just reveals himself to them, calls them close to him, has an intimate relationship or intimate conversation with them for the very first time, sends all of his servants and things out. And part of that, I think, was to let them know that they weren't in that much trouble. That otherwise it's 11 of them against one of Joseph with that, if the servants and things aren't there. And so he reveals himself to them. He also tells them, in order to verify who he is, that the one detail that hasn't been mentioned in all this interaction that they've had, and that is that you sold me into Egypt. So that was what convinced them and what let them know that this truly was Joseph, because only they knew that they had done that. And so with that, and what's interesting is he said, "Don't be distressed," because they are distressed. "And don't be angry with yourselves for selling me here," because why?
God sent him to
God
save
did
you.
it. Because it was to save lives that God sent me here ahead of you. So Joseph is saying, and where he came to this realization, it really doesn't tell us. But he is saying now that it's okay. This is part of a plan. God sent me here. And so we have to then wonder, did God sell him into slavery? Did God send him into, or how did God play in this? And what did God actually do here? Where did God step in? Because if God sent him there ahead of them, you can, and this is all part of God's plan to do that. We're back. How far back do you go to figure out where God's plan and all of that started? Did it start when he was born, and Jacob started giving him preferential treatment? Did it start when he got the coat? Did it start when he started ratting on his brothers for not doing the right things when they were out in the fields? Or did it begin with the selling of him into slavery? Where did that plan begin? Anybody know?
Conception.
The dreams.
The dreams could have started with that, because he had those dreams. So God was telling them that these things were going to occur. God could have done it in other ways. And the answer is we don't really know. But it was there, and God was a part of it. Now there's a couple different ways, and we're going to see this actually comes in chapter 50 again, the same conversation between them. And Joseph puts it a little bit different there. And I think that sheds light on this part today, because what Joseph says there is, you meant it for harm, God used it for good. And I think that's what he's kind of saying here too, that that at whatever point that it was, that God was planning on using that, and God had set it up so that those things could occur. And the dreams was maybe one way of letting Joseph know it's going to be okay. You're going to go through these things and all this with his dad and his brothers didn't think much about the dreams, but we see that the dreams came true. The visions that he had about his family bowing down to him were exactly true. And actually, at the end of the chapter before 44, they were all laying prostrate on the ground. You couldn't bow down any farther than they were bowed down. So then the question becomes, did God do it or did God use it? Because there's two different ways of looking at it. And here Joseph kind of leaves it open at the end of the chapter. And I'll just kind of give you a little preview about what was happening there, or what will be happening there when we get to it, is that Jacob dies. And now they're thinking, oh, Dad's out of the way. There's nobody to stop Joseph. At least before he had to answer to Dad. Now Dad's gone. And they start in on some stuff. And Joseph says, don't worry about it. You meant it for harm. God used it for good. And so I think that's more the way that we need to go with this, that they, I think you could turn around to the sale that he had, because what was the initial thing that was going to happen? They were going to kill him. And instead, they threw him in the pit. And then, Reuben was going to come back and get him out. But in the meantime, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites and everybody came by and they sold him, and off he went into slavery. So, you could look at it that they intended to kill him. God intervened and had him sent to Egypt, knowing that the drought was going to come, or that God was going to do the drought. But I think it was more that it was going to come. So, God sent me here ahead of you. That could be taken instead of Joseph being killed by his brothers, that God intervened at that point, sent him on to Egypt. And how long's the famine going on now?
2 years.
2 years. And he's got 5 more. And they're going to get rough. Famines get worse every year. There's less and less food, of course. So he says again, God sent me ahead of you to preserve you for a remnant on earth. Now that's an interesting word, to be a remnant, because what's a remnant mean?
Piece. It's like fabric,
It's a piece, but it's what kind of a piece? It's a leftover piece, right?
Yeah.
You have carpet remnants at the carpet store. That's leftover pieces and all that. But he calls them a remnant. Now, there is a term that is used throughout, when you get out of the Torah, the first 5 books, and you get into all the rest of it, that is used quite a bit, called the righteous remnant. And we hear Isaiah talks about it and others. And it was kind of like when the northern kingdom fell. There were some that still were good, kept the faith, the lower kingdom, Judah and all that, but also that when the rest of the country would fall away, there was always the righteous remnant, the ones that, even though maybe even the priests and temple were going in the wrong direction, they were the ones that stayed true. They were the leftovers, or the ones that were almost the discarded part. And so that's what it looks like here, that he's saying, God chose you as a remnant. They don't belong to anybody, right? They're kind of left over. And they're not, they come from the land of the Arabs, or the Canaanites. Well, actually, first off, they came from the land of the Arabs. Abraham was, today we call him a Babylonian, Iraqi was where he came from. Babylon was a part of what is today Iraq. But he would have been a Chaldean, is what he was called, Ur the Chaldeans. And so they brought him up, but now he's not a part of that because he's way off. Then you have the whole thing with Laban and all that with Rachel's family, and they're what was called Mesopotamians. They're kind of up in that area between Syria and Iraq and all that up in there. they're not Canaanites, right? You know, in the land of the Holy Land, or what we call it today. Abraham even called himself a sojourner there. You know, he didn't even own any land to begin with. He owned a grave, but that was all that he owned by the time that he died. And the rest of the family really didn't own anything. And so now they're down in Egypt. They are left over. They don't belong to anybody. They're not a piece of anything. And so God is preserving this remnant, this part that nobody else wants. God is preserving them, and Joseph is seeing it for a purpose, and to be a great deliverance. So it's not just a little bit, but to be big. Now, Joseph and all of his brothers and everybody would have known about the promise. You know that the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that promise was given to all of them, would be as great as the sand on the seashore, the stars in the sky, and all those sort of things. So in order for that to happen, there has to be a group of people to become that. If they get wiped out, then it's not going to happen anymore. And so he has said twice, God sent me here. God could have said, when they sold him into slavery, could have been that they were going the other way, and he could have ended up back in Iraq, Iran, or any place else, depending on where they were from. God sent me here, and he sent me here for a purpose, and Joseph sees himself as fulfilling that purpose. So for the third time, verse 8, so then it was not you who sent me here, but God. And not only that, he did what? 3 things.
Father to Pharaoh, Lord of the land and the house.
Father to Pharaoh, Lord of the household, ruler of Egypt. And actually, all 3 of those, when you look back in the original language, are Egyptian titles. Each one of them is considered basically what we would say a cabinet level position or a ministerial position. The Lord of the household would be like chief of staff at the White House. And father to Pharaoh means his number 1 counselor. Telling him this is what's right, this is what's wrong, all those sort of things. And then ruler of all Egypt, of course, it wouldn't have been Pharaoh. They used the term Pharaoh separately, but ruling in Pharaoh's place. So, and what he's saying is, I've got it all. The only thing that it really never mentions about Joseph is whether he was in charge of any army or if that stayed under Pharaoh. But he says ruler of all Egypt. Now that's a land thing. That's but not necessarily a war thing. So
What did you say meeting father to Pharaoh means?
being his counselor and his chief advisor. So now he tells him to go back and to talk to whom?
Dad.
Yeah, whose dad?
Joseph's dad.
Yeah, he says, my father. Go back and tell my father. So he is making this very personal, making sure they understand. Don't go back and tell all of our dads. Don't go back and tell your dad. You go back and tell my father. I am the ruler. I'm the advisor. I'm the chief of staff. So you go back and tell my father. I don't care whether he's your father or not. You go back and tell my father. This is what your son Joseph says. He wants to make sure they understand that relationship there. And and he tells them to hurry, right? Mm-hmm. Don't dilly-dally around. You need to get this over. Because I'm sure that, why would Joseph want him to hurry?
Dad's probably hungry.
His dad ready to die.
Yeah, he wants to see him before he died. He wasn't in great shape when Joseph left. And it's been a long time, been 22 years by this point since Joseph was sold into slavery. He's about 39 now. And so he was 17 when he was sold. And so, it's and his dad seemed to be about to die back then.
Well, he was old back then.
Yeah. So, he every day counts.
Yeah.
Plus he hadn't seen him. He hasn't seen him in 22 years. He hadn't seen his dad. and probably thought he was already dead. That's the first question he asked him when he realized who they were. You know, do you have a father? Yep. Is he well? Yes. You know, which is to me is a very personable thing to do. Of course, he made it sound official, but you can read it in Joseph. How's my dad? Is he still alive? Is he well? Is he doing okay? And all that. So God has made me Lord of Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You know, now that's unusual that that the son says to the father, "Come to me." But in this instance, he's saying, "I am the ruler," and this is not an order. You know, it's I'm the ruler, and I'm giving an official order that you're to come down. It's I'm the ruler. Come to me. I can't really come to you. I can't just leave and come up there. Because they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have satellite communication, and they didn't have all those other things. It would have been months and stuff. And so Joseph, and right now he's right in the middle of the famine. So, and what else is he telling?
They're gonna live in the region?
You're going to live in Goshen, which is what? Near me. Verse 10, you shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. And so no longer are we separated. You're going to come and be in Goshen near me. Now what else does that tell you? Joseph lives in Goshen. So, and actually later on that gets called the land of Ramses, and that's where the slaves were and all that sort of thing. And you and basically everybody that belongs to you. Joseph is telling him, this is not just about him and his dad, just like he said to begin with in the conversation. God sent me here to preserve this remnant. The remnant is not just dad, it is everybody. He tells him, you, your children, grandchildren, flocks, herds, all you have. Bring it here. Everything that is yours, bring it. And why? So I can provide for you. It's going to be hard to provide for you where you live. If you come to where I am, number one, it's close to me. You know, we were like this. Remember, that was the whole point, was Joseph was the favored son. Now you can come back, we can be together again. And I will take care of you because this famine's got 5 more years coming. And do you want to be coming back and forth, trying to carry grain back and forth? Which, the other thing that you got to think about too with even that is that grain is going to get more valuable as it goes. So it's even going to be a security issue. If you're sending, 10, 11 guys down with a bunch of donkeys to get grain and bring it back, unless you got military guard with them, they may not make it back with their grain. Somebody else is going to be hungry and trying to get all that too. So I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. And if you don't, what's going to happen?
You're gonna become destitute.
You're going to be destitute. You're going to be without everything. You're going to be basically starving and homeless, and because there's not going to be any place for you to live, you're going to be looking around for some place to live. So, verse 12, you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin. That is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt, and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterwards his brothers talked with him. So, and he's telling them, you can tell it's me if you look at me. And so can Benjamin, who's his full brother and all of that. But so, you can all tell it's really me who's talking to you. They're speaking in Hebrew. Not in Egyptian through an interpreter anymore. They're speaking in Hebrew. And he's talking to them about that. And go down again. bring him back quickly. Tell him all about all of it. And, it makes you wonder, do they have to tell him about it because he's still wondering about what kind of trust his dad has in his brothers. They've not been the most honest men when he was around them. And make sure you tell him, make sure you tell him, make sure you tell him. It kind of, that message gets repeated over and over. And again, and bring him quickly. Don't dilly-dally around. And so he throws his arms around Benjamin and wept. Of course, Benjamin was weeping with him. And then what does he do?
Kissed all his brothers.
Kisses all his brothers. Why did he kiss his brothers? And wept with them. Yeah, he wanted them to understand it's all done. It's all over. Don't worry about it. We're friends. And this isn't a Judas moment. The betraying them with a kiss. This is about telling them that the relationship is good. So, and up to this time, what kind of do we notice about his brothers in all of this?
I thought they were still kind of reluctant.
They were reluctant. That's what it says, verse 15. Afterwards, after they wait for him to go through all this. He says it 2 or 3 times. He finally kisses them, weeps with them, every one of them, showing him he's glad to see him. And then it says, afterwards, his brothers talked with him. Up to that time, they're still kind of wondering what the heck's going on and how's this going to play out. They finally understand that this is a good thing. This is okay, that he's not there to do anything bad with them. Verse 16. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. You are also directed to tell them, do this. Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of Egypt will be yours. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh has commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread, and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said to them, don't quarrel on the way. So,
Yes, Mom.
Pharaoh finds out Joseph's family's here, and what's his reaction?
Glad.
Fantastic. If Joseph is this good, maybe his family, but just the fact that, by this time he would have kind of known Joseph's history and things, and to know that his family's there, they're reunited, would have been a good thing for him, because it would have been a good thing for Joseph. So now Pharaoh's conversing with Joseph. These things don't happen, and Alex even mentioned it in Sunday school this morning. Sometimes when we read things, we see them happening in immediate consequence, one right after another. And so, it says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, this probably was not at the same time, definitely was not at the same time. It might have been the next day. It might have been a couple of days. I don't think it would have been a couple of days, because Joseph is, anxious to see his father. He tells him 3 times, go quickly, bring him back, hurry up, and all that. So, whether Pharaoh summoned Joseph or if they just had their interaction, in the course of both of them's duties, we don't know. But all the officials and all Pharaoh knows, and all of his officials were glad to. So Pharaoh actually gives 2 orders to Joseph. This is the only time we see Pharaoh giving Joseph orders. He usually lets Joseph take care of everything. What's the first one?
Load animals and return to the land.
Yep. Tell your brothers that they are to load their animals, return, bring your family back. To whom?
To the Pharaoh.
to Pharaoh, to me. And what's he going to do with them?
Gonna give them the best of
Give them the best of the land. So Pharaoh is very pleased. We're going to bring them back, and we're going to reward them because of Joseph and give them the best. And what are they going to enjoy?
Fat of the land.
The fat of the land. And is there much fat right now? No. No, but they're going to enjoy the fat of the land. And then what's the second order?
Take the carts from Egypt.
Yeah, don't worry about everything you got. Just leave it there. Send the carts with enough what? Provisions to get there and back. Then tell them to, because so just get there, get the people, come back. Don't worry about anything else. Then never mind about your belongings. So, because I'm going to give you plenty, and just get your families and your father and come back. So, what does Joseph do? He gave him the carts. He followed Pharaoh's order, as Pharaoh had commanded, and provisions for the journey. So he doesn't really give them the food like they had come to seek out, because they don't need a whole lot of food like they would have if they were going back and living for a few months until the food come out. Then they come back and get some more. Then they'd have to go back and all that. He's just giving the provisions is different. Provisions are the supplies for the journey. So that's all he's giving them, enough to get down there, get everybody else, come back, everybody riding in carts. And, it doesn't really say why carts, because the thing you have to wonder about is, if they're leaving everything, why do they need carts?
Get back quicker.
Quicker. And why is it quicker?
They're not walking.
They're not walking, and the women, the children, and even sometimes the men aren't walking. And how fast, at this time, I think 130. It comes up in the next chapter or so that Abraham tells him how old he is, and I think it's 130. So is he going to move fast?
No.
No. So this would have been a faster way for them all to travel. It's also a demonstration that it is Pharaoh, that he's doing what he promised, that he has the authority to follow through, and all of them. And so besides their provisions, what else did he give them?
New clothing,
New clothing.
except for Benjamin.
Benjamin got how much?
300 shekels.
Well, he got 300 shekels of silver.
Five
Lord,
sets of clothes.
5 sets of clothing. Now, do you remember where the 5 comes in? The meal, right, John? When they were serving the meal, Benjamin got 5 portions more than everybody else. So this was not just a double or even more than that. It was 5 times as much and a whole lot of silver. It sounds like about 7.5 pounds, but if you think about what pure silver is worth at 7.5 pounds, silver is, and gold, its worth is measured by the pound, the ounce. So, this would have been 7.5 pounds is a lot. And so what else does he do?
Sent the father 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt.
Yep. 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, 10 donkeys full of grain. And, that doesn't, we think, man, that seems like a lot. But how many people are they feeding?
About 70.
About 70. And for a few weeks. So it wouldn't take long to go through that much. And other provisions for the journey. And he sends them away. And as they were leaving, he said, what?
Don't quarrel.
Don't be fighting. And actually he says, the old word is, don't get shaken. That's was a word that was used a lot in the Old Testament for angry or quarreling. And it kind of goes, you ever heard somebody talk about they were so mad they were shaking all over type thing, So he's saying don't, or you get a hold of somebody and you shake them to show them that you're mad or whatever, But he's saying forget about it. He knows his brothers, you know, how they argue and different things. He's heard all that as he was growing up. So now he's saying, don't quarrel about it. Don't argue about it. Don't try to figure out who was to blame, who got us in this, and all that kind of stuff. He said, just do it. Just go get them. Get back here. Don't be fighting along the way. Plus, he doesn't want to get into a family squabble to where it delays them coming back and all that sort of thing. So
I thought they might be quarreling because Benjamin got more again this
that
time.
could be too. You know, she said that they could have been quarreling because Benjamin got more than they did, and that's a very real possibility. And you know, and about why Simeon had to be in jail and all those kind of things. But so verse 25. So they went up out of Egypt, came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he's ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, I am convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before he died. Now, wouldn't that, you know, in all seriousness, wouldn't that be a hard one for Jacob? The boys all come back and say, guess what? We saw Joseph.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. And so, you know what? We know that early in their life, they weren't real honest with Dad. That's why he sent Joseph out to spy on them, because he couldn't trust what they were telling him. It seems like some of that mistrust is still there. What convinces him? The carts and the goodies and the provisions and things. And and what were the carts for?
To carry him back.
To carry him back, to make sure he got back. Joseph wanted them all, but he was only concerned about his dad, getting Dad back here. And so his spirit lifted. And wouldn't it? I mean, that's one of those kind of duh things, you know, to find out that you thought somebody was dead for 22 years. You thought they'd been mauled by an animal and had a grisly, gruesome, fearful death, and now they're alive and a ruler, and you're going to go see him. You know, it would have been unreal. And so, and he is still alive, and I will go and see him before I die. So, 46, chapter 46. So Israel, Jacob and Israel is all the same person. Israel set out with all that was his, and when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob. Here I am, he replied. I am the God of your father. He said, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. So he gets out. What's he take? It says with all that was his. So what's that mean? Probably doesn't mean his possessions as much as it just means all of his family. All the family that was his. And so he travels, and he gets to where? The well of the oath. Beersheba's a well. It becomes a town. It's a well. The well of the oath. And it goes back, it plays into the time of Abraham and of Isaac. And if you remember Isaac and the people of Shechem, they were fighting. There wasn't enough room for all the flocks and the wells, and every time Isaac's men would claim a well, the other guys would come in and say, no, that was ours first. And so finally they dig this well, and Isaac has the other group come out, and they make with the Philistines, they make an agreement that this is our well, and we're going to live in peace with one another, and we're going to separate and all that kind of stuff. And so it's called the well of the oath. Now, Beersheba also plays in very much in the rest of the Old Testament. But the city of Beersheba, or even though the well of Beersheba, and how does it figure in? There's a saying quite a bit, but that's in there. But Beersheba is the southernmost point of Israel during most of the existence of Israel. Dan, the city Dan, is the northernmost point. And the way that we would say, from like coast to coast, or New York to LA, maybe is a better way to put it. When we say, well, from New York to LA, we mean, and everything in between, the whole country. Well, that was how they referred to the nation of Israel, because it's not wide, it's narrow, and it's longer than it is. And so they would say from Dan to Beersheba. And you'll see that phrase in there quite a bit. But Beersheba was always considered the southernmost part. So he almost stops here before he leaves. This was the farthest that Isaac had gotten, because God told Isaac, do not leave this land. And Isaac is the only one. Abraham, of course, came from outside and came in, went to Egypt twice. And Jacob was all over the place. But Isaac never left. This was as far as he would have been. And being his son, one of his two sons, Jacob, or Israel, whatever you want to call him, would have known about this, the whole story with the well, known that this was a well that his father had dug, and that and they offered a sacrifice there back then. So now he's there, this place where his father worshiped was special to his father, and so he offered sacrifices there just like his father did. And so then he goes to bed. And what happens?
Vision.
He has a vision. Now there's a difference between a vision and a dream. He has a vision. And now it doesn't say that he was sleeping, just that he had a vision at night. Whether he was sleeping and had it, if he got awakened and had it, if it was before he went to bed, whatever. But he had a vision. And what happens in that vision? Yeah, God calls out to him. But what does he call him by? Jacob. Why wouldn't he call him Israel?
Jacob's his name.
It's the more personable thing to do. God is trying to reach him on a personal level. And God is going back to the name that he was born with. God's the one that gave him his name of Israel and said, from now on you'll be called Struggle with God. But here it's not about the struggle. And so he calls out to him and he says, here I am. The same answer that we see that was given by Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob gives it in other places. Same answer that Daniel gave, when God called him the 3 times and he finally said, here I am, your servant is listening. So verse 3 says, God says, I am God, the God of your father. He said, do not be afraid to go down into Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. I read that again because there are several very important theological statements in this. What is the first one?
Don't be afraid.
Nope.
I'm God.
I'm God. Not a God. Not one of the gods. Not a choice of gods. I am God. Period. That's it. And then the second thing is, I'm the God that your father worshiped, which also meant what?
It's his God.
God to his, Marty said his dad worshiped Abraham. And the Jews refer to that. I know some Christians today that refer to God as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so he's also, by saying the God of your father, what else is he doing? He's identifying with whom he just sacrificed to. He sacrificed to whom? Back in verse 1. To the God of his father, Isaac. And God said, I'm that one. I am God. I am that one God that your father sacrificed to, and now you're sacrificing to. Don't be afraid. For what? About what?
Going down to Egypt.
Going down to Egypt. Why would he be afraid to go to Egypt?
Egypt didn't like that.
Yeah, there's a lot. And Jacob's life was not always the the greatest. And, you know, and he's supposed to be a part of the Holy Land. He's going someplace he doesn't know, a place he doesn't, never been. And so in a different kind of people, a place that was, here's a monotheistic, a one God faith person going down to a polytheistic, a many God place. And God says, don't be afraid, and to go down there. Now, it's also, we see later that in this whole thing, at the end, what's the last thing God tells him?
That Joseph's going to be one of the closest to his eyes.
Yeah, number one, you're not going to die alone. And the one that you cherish the most is going to be sitting at your side when it happens. So, why, and it's coming on back later. Two guys in this story that don't get buried in Egypt. You know who they are? Between now and the end of Genesis.
Joseph may be one.
Huh?
Joseph
is one.
Jacob.
Jacob is the other. Jacob tells them, do not bury me in this land, when he's about to die. So, you know, I wonder if that wasn't part of his fear. I'm going to a strange land. You know, it was a big deal back then to be buried in your family tomb. You know, and so everybody's in that tomb so far, except for whom?
Jacob.
Rachel.
Oh.
And she died down by Bethlehem. And, you know, they didn't have embalming and hearses and all that. Wherever you died, that's where you had to be buried. And actually, the Jewish practice for most Jews, conservative Jews, is 24 hours before the sun goes down, actually. And so he sounds like he's he's afraid to go down and die, not be able to come out. And that kind of comes out later. Of course, God would have known that, knows what's in his heart. God knows, you know, he's wanting to go down to be with Joseph, but obviously he has this fear of either dying by himself. You're not going to die by yourself. Joseph is going to be with you. And who else is going to be with him? Yeah, God. So I'm the one God. I'm the God that your father and your grandfather worshiped. I'm the God which also means I'm the God that's been with you. And I'm going to continue to be with you. Now, the next theological statement is that God is not a God of boundaries. You know, people back then, especially, and all the way up through most of the Old Testament, even into some of the book of Acts and all that, and into almost modern times, probably in the medieval times, believed that gods were geographic. You know, just like you had a king of your country, you had a God of your country. And the Old Testament in a lot of places talks about the God of the Moabites, you know, the God of this group, the God of the Babylonians, and all those sort of things. And that's the way that they saw it. And even when it come to battles, people thought that two battles, king goes to battle, king against king, that's a battle. Up here, God against God is fighting as well. What happens up here determines what happens down here. And so if this king overcomes this one and gains this territory, then this God has overcome that one and gained his territory. What God is saying here is, I was with you when you were in Mesopotamia, where Laban is, which is way up there, and now I'm going to be with you way down there. I am going to go with you. You're not going by yourself. Wherever you are, that's where I will be. And and what else does he tell him?
Bring him back.
Yep, bring him back. And so he doesn't tell him he's going to bring him back alive, right? But he's going to bring you back. Don't worry about being in Egypt. I'm going to bring you back to the tomb. And what's the other thing that he tells him? It's kind of in the middle.
It's going to make him into a great nation.
The great nation. That's where the promise of the nation is going to start. Because right now there's 70. Is that a great nation? No. And but in the time that they are in Egypt, and Abraham is is told that back in like chapter 15 or something, that it would happen in Egypt. That is where you're going to go. That is where I am going to make the people. Now, when it comes to that statement, just to kind of give you a little heads up insight before we ever get there, when you get to, by the time you get to Exodus, you know, there's 400 years between Genesis and Exodus. But in that 400 years, we start off with 70. How many do we end up with in 400 years?
Live it on your toes and fingers.
Yep, somewhere around 1.1, 1.2 million. And the reason that they come up with that number is that there's a couple of different times while they're in the wilderness that they count the soldiers. The soldiers were over 600,000 men of fighting age. And back then they had more than 4 people to a family, but if you just take that times 4, that's 2.4 million people. So, you know, that's kind of how they come up with it. Either way, whether it's 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, God did just what he's saying here. I will make you into a great nation there. And, you know, to us, that may not sound like much. You know, 1 million is about the size of greater Indianapolis. You know, there's only about 750,000 in Indy, but when you take in Brownsburg, Avon, and all the donut towns that go circle around it, it comes into about 1 million people over there. So, you know, but if you're going into a place that's a wilderness and settling there, you could be that will be a great nation to come. You get there from 70 when it started. So, so there's one God. I am the God. I'm the only God. I'm the one that not was just yours, but Isaac's, the one you just sacrificed to. I'm that one, the one that brought Abraham up and all of that. Don't be afraid for where you're going, because I'm going with you, and I'm going to bring you back. You're not going to die alone. I'm going to fulfill my promise. There's a lot in that one little paragraph there. So, verse 5, then Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. They also took with them their livestock and the possessions they had acquired in Canaan, and Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt. He took with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons, his daughters and granddaughters, all his offspring. So, Jacob doesn't stay in Beersheba, right? He's up. He's ready to go. And now, who's doing the taking?
The sons of Israel.
The boys, you know, because it says the sons all got everything together. The sons transported him, so he's riding, which we would expect at 130 years old, and the kids and everything else. Now, did they do exactly all they were told to do? No. What did they do?
They brought everything.
They brought everything. Pharaoh said, "Don't worry about bringing anything. I'll give it to you." And, you know, so did they fully trust in what they were being told? Nope. So they're hedging their bets. And they do bring their children, their wives, and all of them in there. And now, the other thing that it tells us too, how many generations? Just 3. And so him, sons, grandsons, daughters, granddaughters, all his offspring. So it tells us that there weren't any more besides grandkids. That's the last that he had. And so the livestock, possessions, all that they had acquired in Canaan. And so off they go to Egypt. So it wouldn't have been a quick trip, right? If you're trying to bring around all the livestock and all that sort of stuff. And especially if there was a famine, there wouldn't have been much in the way of grazing and all those sort of things either. And there is not much between Egypt and Israel, except for especially the time you leave Beersheba, it's almost desert the whole way out. So, verse 8, these are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his descendants who went to Egypt. Now, we could go through all these. It lists them by their mothers. And so the first batch are the ones that Leah had, and Padam Aram, which is northwest that is the land of Laban, that's where while they were still living with under Laban's tent, and Dinah is mentioned, all the sons and grandsons, and Dinah 33, and then Zilpah's 16, and then Bilhah's 7. So she didn't have a whole lot. You look at Dan. Dan had one son. Didn't even have any grandsons at this time. Naphtali had 4 sons. So, there wasn't much there. And then, so they all went, I missed Rachel in there, but anyway, that's verse 22. The sons of Rachel, 14. Now, if you add up everything on this page, what do you think you come up to?
66.
Yep. Because when it talks about the 70, there ends up being 70 there, but you got some of them you got Joseph and 2 sons that are already down there. So 70 end up down there, and
Would they have
so-
had any servants?
do what?
Would they-
Oh yeah.
So, but they had to leave their servants behind?
No, they probably took them with them. So that's where 26 says, all those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbers 66 persons, with the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt. The members of Jacob's family who went with him were 70 in all. Now, what's the significance about 70? If you divide it by 10, what do you have?
7.
7. And what's the number 7? The divine number or the fulfillment number. How many days of creation? 7. What day do we rest on? 7th. All those things. And the 7 is number 1 number. That sounded really good, didn't it? It's the most repetitive number in the Torah, 7. And in a lot of the Bible. You get to Revelation, 7's really big. And 7 and 11. So, when they're throwing their dice, that's where those numbers
I was
actually.
thinking of the gas
I don't know
station.
that really is what the Bible intends it to be, but so those things there, and so it tells us that those were his direct descendants, and 66, and then you add in the wives, and that's where you come up with the 70. So 70 in all, 66 went down. And we got about a minute and a half. There's not enough time there to get into the next paragraph. Other than, I will say this. We did talk last week, about the change from Reuben to Judah. Who was the leader of the family now? Judah. Judah was the one that did all the speaking to Joseph. Reuben, especially the last time we even hear from Reuben is when he offered his 2 sons in place of Benjamin, and then Judah comes along and says, no, I'll put myself there, not 2 of my own kids and all that. And he's the one that has the conversation with Joseph, does all the talking with Joseph. And so now we see that not only, it wasn't a matter just that he assumed that role. What we're going to see next time is, like it says in verse 20, now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. So he sends him as the family representative or the emissary, or he is, it wasn't this that he went. Dad picked him to go for Dad. That's big. And do you remember what son he was? The number?
3rd or 4th.
4th. And Reuben he'd messed up a couple times. Slept with one of his dad's concubines, I think Bilhah. And then, what was the other one? He pulled in this whole thing about he didn't take care of Joseph and all the other stuff. And then Simeon and Levi, they were the ones who went into Shechem and killed everybody there. And because they were the brothers of Dinah. And so then the next one after that comes up as Judah. And so how does Judah play? How does this play out for Judah in the long run? Not just Judah, tribe of Judah. So you got Judah, the man, the patriarch or the son, the brother of Joseph, son of Jacob. that steps up to be the leader
Of the Jews.
of the family. And what, Marty?
Leader of the Jews.
He becomes that family becomes the leader of the Jews two ways. Number one, and we see that in the final blessings that actually Jacob gives them in 49 or 50. That is where the king is to come from, and David. And then also that is where the Messiah will eventually come from. And the people were called Judah is the English for basically, or word for Jews. Jude is the shorter version of it, which from Jude is where we get Jew. And you can tell how much they sound alike. So even the whole nation, the whole southern half, all the Davidic kingdom based out of Jerusalem gets named even after Judah, the land of Judah, so that's where that all plays in. And so next time we will pick up with verse 28. One thing I forgot to mention real quick, back when God said, don't fear, with Abraham on verse 3, do not be afraid. The term, it's actually a two-word term. It means don't fear, and it's mentioned quite a bit. That is, in the Bible, that is a number one phrase in the whole Bible. The most used term in the whole Bible. Old Testament, New Testament, both of them together, even separate. So, and I mean, even you think about it, on Bethlehem, out with the shepherds, what's the first thing the angel said? Fear not, for I bring you great time. Every time the angels appear to somebody, fear not. Don't be afraid. With Joshua going into getting ready to take over, God says, fear not. Be strong and courageous. Fear not. Not fearing. Fearing is one of the things that people do probably as much as anything. We fear a lot of stuff. But the one thing God tells us is don't be afraid. And one thing I meant to mention about that earlier is that if you trust God and you don't fear, then, there are three kinds of people. Number one, those that fear God. Number two, those that fear people. Number three, those that don't fear anything. Those are the most dangerous because nothing matters to them. And that's a lot of your criminals and a lot of things like that. The ones that fear man are the ones that are always afraid. That's the ones of which you find in societies that, like Korea or different things. That even the only way you can stand up to tyranny, if you fear people, fear man, you'll never stand up to anybody, never stand up to tyranny, never. Only those who fear God, or that don't, have that wholesome fear of God, and aren't fearing the world but trusting in God, then they know they can stand up to anything because it's not about what happens here. And even, like Paul and different ones, if you can lose your life, but you save your life. If you fear for your life, if you're fearful, you're going to lose everything. So that's I meant to get that in when I talked about, we had that phrase when we talked, that's the other theological thing that was in that statement is trust God, don't fear. Don't fear anything in the world. Just trust God. And even with Jacob, as much as he was, God is even having to tell him, I'm God. I'm the one you've been worshiping. I'm going to be with you. Don't be afraid. And that's one of the main emphasis is even for us today. God is with us. Don't be afraid. Fear not, for I am with you. So see you all next time. And Don appreciated your notes. And so we'll catch everybody Wednesday night. And then again next week, same time, same station. And Superman and Mighty Mouse won't be here, but we'll be here. So we'll see you then. Go out, be blessed, and be a blessing.